Welcome to Talking Junk.
I'm your host, Jason Melendez.
Live now every week on Fridays.
Talking Junk.
A multitude of professionals in different aspects, different walks of life.
You have to come on and talk junk like a normal person.
Hello, welcome to Talking Junk today with me, Taulin, and I'm going to be interviewing for you today Mr. Jonathan McLernon. He is a eating disorder expert. He is a well-traveled man. He's ex-military. He has many experiences, many things that are inspirational to share with us today, and let's get to it. So let me bring on with us Mr. Jonathan McLernon. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing fantastic. You know, I was listening to that intro and I was like, boy, I don't think I'm like hip hop enough for that intro.
No, we like to give out the nice, chill vibes. Everybody who comes on the show, let's know your vibe.
Yeah, but I like it. I mean, I love music. I back in the day, I studied music at university, but I decided I wasn't going to make any money at it. So I was like, oh, so then I got into like chemistry and marketing psychology because I thought maybe I was going to be a science teacher.
Okay.
And then I got like most of the way through that, and then I decided to join the Navy. I guess
so right there, a whole bunch of different changes. Everything else, I keep learning more and more. It's like, my goodness, how much could you have done so much already in your life? Hey, Jasmine.
Hey, Jasmine, how you doing?
She's usually with us on the break room.
Fantastic.
But let's kind of pull back a little bit to college. What kind of brought you into college? Did you know as a kid what you wanted to do? Were you?
I had no idea. I mean, so I had kind of an interesting, we can go right back at the very beginning. I had an interesting birth story. I was born at 26 weeks. So, average gestation is like, 39, 40 weeks. And I popped out 14 weeks early. So I wasn't actually expected to survive. Thankfully, my dad had I was born at home. My mom originally thought she had to go to the bathroom, wasn't expecting me going into labor at 26 weeks kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And this is back in 1982. I've crossed over the 40 year mark. Crazy. Wow. But my dad had the presence of mind. Yeah. Hey, Amanda, how you doing? My dad had the presence of mind to do CPR with his pinky finger and use like a tiny syringe to unplug my airways and sort of got my heart beating and my lungs inflated, which without that, I probably would have had like serious brain damage and may not have survived. And then, I got trucked off to a hospital, and then I was on life support for about 9 weeks while they basically tried to keep me alive. So.
Wow. Kick it right up before you even got here. You were already going through stories of survival. Like that's crazy.
Yeah. So, well, I guess one thing the doctor said was this kid has a temper. So
you decided you were going to live and nothing was going to stop you.
Yeah. I decided I wanted to be alive, I guess, and so I was born a bit of a fighter.
Okay. All right. So did that kind of continue early in childhood, or was it kind of mellow for a bit before things got crazy again?
I was always like, I have an older brother, and so I was like a pretty feisty kid. I was pretty competitive with him. I wanted to learn to do everything he was doing. Of course, tried to keep up with him. Used to have terrible temper tantrums. Like my parents say, like they would basically have to just turn on the cold shower and stick my hand into the cold shower to get me to cool down, because I would just get so worked up that that they're like, I don't know what to do with this kid. Do you know? No, So, but eventually, I mean, of course, I was an ordinary kid. It's just that I had these moments where I would just like snap and
well, you were fighting for your life from literally before day one. So it's a little bit fair.
Yeah. So I just kind of had like this, I think this really strong independent streak, I guess, is what it was. And so even from my mom says I used to like take my bottle in my teeth and like run over behind the curtain and try to feed myself. And so it probably stems from, being born. I spent the first like two and a half months of my life in an incubator on life support, instead of like normally a baby would be like connected to the mom and lots of skin to skin contact, maybe some nursing, that kind of thing. Whereas, I'm laying flat on my back, hooked up to wires and machines and stuff. And so, of course, I don't remember any of this, but I do see the pictures. And so, yeah, I think there's an element of that, because I'm really fascinated by brain development, by kind of like, I mean, we'll get into the sort of the behavioral psychology stuff of what I do, but I look back now and I go, oh, you know what? A lot of that kind of makes sense when you tie it back to kind of my origin story.
Right. Okay. Wow. That's pretty cool. So like, So were you kind of always like an adventurous kind of person as well? Were you always taking risk, or did that
Yep.
kind of come a little later?
My parents had to put a leash on me. I think it's because I'm just like an intensely curious, guy, and I just wanted to know everything worked and try to figure so much out. And so, yeah, yeah.
Abby
Um,
Rabbit.
AB Rabbit, yeah. So they really had to sort of keep an eye on me because I just like rip off into crowds and just go and I wasn't afraid of people or anything. And so they were like, "Whoa, we gotta like tame this kind of kid here." So, yeah, and I got into a lot of fights as a kid too. I think that was that temper coming out. I was like really competitive, and I look back now and I'm like, back then like schoolyard fights were just you get into a fight till one guy got knocked down, then you kind of walked away and you're like, I won. It wasn't like this. I don't know. It seems like fights have changed from back in the day.
Yeah, they've gotten more aggressive from just a one-on-one about you and me to you beat me. Well, now I'm just gonna go get some friends and we're gonna solve this, and I'm gonna win in the end. And
Yeah. So it wasn't like that back in the day. It sounds so funny to be talking like that. It's hard to believe I'm 40 sometimes.
I just hit 30 last year, and I feel young, but then I'll say some things. I'm like, all right, I guess some time has passed.
Yeah. Like my wife did something really cool. She had a bunch of people record like video messages for me about like memories over the course of my life and fun experiences I remember, and maybe some advice from people that were over 40. And one of my friends who lives in Italy, he's a Venezuelan guy that lives in Italy, and he said, your brain's still going to think you're young, and you're going to still think like, yeah, I can do everything I used to do and all of that. He said, but your body's going to correct you.
Yes, definitely will. I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go up to around college. Sounded like you had a bunch of different angles that you're working with. Did you feel like going in, you knew what you wanted to do, or you just kind of choosing a major and saying, I'll figure it out?
I did kind of have I had a real love for music, and I thought maybe I want to get into like being a music producer. But I grew up in a small town of like 2,000 people. I was like, the university I went to had more hot girls than my town had people. It was like for my young male brain, it was like, oh my gosh, I went to a university campus that had like 25,000 students, and a lot of young university girls, and I was like, holy cow, I didn't realize there's so many good looking girls, and like
women's studies. That's what you're majoring in.
Apparently, yeah. So, but I kind of figured out that I wasn't I wasn't in the right place. I didn't know the right people. I wasn't really connected the way I thought I was in terms of getting into sort of music production. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to go a practical route. Biology is kind of too easy. I shouldn't put it that way, but my thought was, biology is one of the easier sciences. Physics is like the hard science. Chemistry is kind of middle of the road. So why don't I get into chemistry? So it wasn't really a passion decision. It was kind of more like a logical choice. And then marketing psychology was just like, well, maybe if I ever get into business, I should know something about marketing. I had no idea that what I was learning in that element or that realm would like tie into what I do later in life and understanding people's behaviors.
Okay. So before you knew it, you were already learning something for your true profession.
Yeah. So, but the one thing is like, I get bored very easily. And I don't know, I've never been diagnosed with ADD, but like, sometimes I have a pretty short attention span. And so, I remember one of my exams, like I played video games the whole night before, and then just drank a bunch of Jolt Cola and walked in, wrote my name on the exam, went and handed it and walked away. And I failed the exam, but I didn't need to pass the exam to pass the course. But it was like this. And then from there, I just went and I joined the Navy and started doing that full time. And because I'd met some guy that was in boot camp and he was describing it to me. I was like, cool, sounds like a challenge. I'd like a challenge. So I went down to the recruiting office, said this is what I want to do. I had poor vision. I've had laser eye surgery since then, but because of my poor vision, I wasn't allowed to go into the officer class that I wanted to go into. So I ended up going into marine engineering. So glorified diesel mechanic. Like you have to understand ship engineering, the engineering elements of a ship, but really we fixed everything with a moving part, basically.
Okay. Wow. So I'm sure there were plenty of parts on the ships then.
Yeah.
How long did you serve?
I did 2 3-year stints. So I did 3 years. And then in that stretch is when I met the young lady who would become my wife, and we've now been together for 17 years.
Congratulations.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, I met her. So we ended up going back and living in Australia. I took a 1-year leave of absence, went back and lived in Australia with her. My wife's from Australia.
Okay.
and we got married over there, and then came back and I did another 3-year stint.
Okay.
But I came home from a stint one day to my wife, and I was gone like 280 days a year, so I was gone a lot. And
Yeah.
I was like, this is not really a way to have a marriage. Just making phone like, again, we're going back to I think we have a short memory nowadays, but I'm like, I remember when we had a satellite phone that you had to try to connect to in the middle of the ocean, and it's like a 20-second delay, and you get like 3 minutes of satellite time, satellite phone time a day. You basically say, hey, are you still alive? Cool. I love you too. What are you doing? Can't tell you. Okay, bye. Like that was like the extent of it. And so I came home one day and I was like, look, you know what? Why don't we just go teach English somewhere? And she was like, okay. I was like, okay.
Was she already involved in teaching English, or was she still was she also serving, or?
No, nothing to do with that. My wife's a performer and like a children's entertainer, actually. So I say I married a clown.
From the big comfy couch? Is that
she's actually trained, like among other things, like as a children's clown, did like children's parties and stuff like that. But she was also like a kind of like did street theater. She does improv comedy as well as like stage acting as well. So she's a born performer.
She's a trained performing artist.
Yeah.
Okay.
So and teaching is sometimes a bit of a performance art. So
okay.
we both love travel, and so we were like, why don't we just, everyone saves up money and like buys a house and just like settles down. I'm like, that's just not us. And so we saved up a bunch of money and said, okay, we just hopped on a plane to Puerto Vallarta and went in Mexico. And then we went inland to Guadalajara, went to a school there that was like a TEFL school. So teaching English as a foreign language. Okay. So TESOL is if you teach English in an English speaking country, teaching English as a second language. TEFL is teaching English as a foreign language. So that's when you're a foreigner in that country teaching English. So we went to a school, did a course there, and they had a sister school. Essentially, it was like for students. So it was just like a feeder program. And so we slotted over into this other school. So we're living in Guadalajara, and Guadalajara is a city of like 6 million people. It's a pretty big city, and it's Mexico's second biggest. Really amazing climate there. It's like 25 year round. What would that be? I don't know, probably like in the maybe 80 Fahrenheit, like year round. And
wow,
yeah, because it's about a mile above sea level. It's very similar to Denver, and there's a very large lake nearby where there's a huge expat community as well called Lake Chapala, and so really, really temperate, moderate climate, which is fantastic. But Guadalajara also has like a suburb, very wealthy suburb, where all the cartel heads live.
Yes.
And so there was quite a bit of conflict between like various federal forces and the cartels. And we kind of recognize, like, I'm clearly white. Like, I'm as white as they come. I say I'm truly Canadian. I come in two colors.
What?
Yeah, I know, right? I come in two colors, red and white. That's it. Canadian through and through. And my wife, she had sort of lighter, like fair colored hair. It's darkened a little bit over the last 10 years, but it was a little bit blonder back then. And so, like, we stood out. It was obvious, and that we're not locals. And we were not really in a tourist area. Now we had some Mexican friends. They hung out with us. They looked after us, made sure we were safe, all that kind of stuff. And I really enjoyed, like, when living in Mexico, when the Mexicans didn't see us as a source of tourist dollars, they just saw us as like another part of the city. Incredibly hospitable. Loved my experience living down there. You know what? I have to say, like, teaching like young adults English in Mexico was one of like probably my favorite teaching gig ever. They're so eager to learn because they recognize the value of English in terms of, say, going across the border. Now, I would say all of my students had crossed the border illegally at least once, if not 5 times.
That's
yeah,
a range.
right. But what they would do is they'd go over across the border, work for, say, 6 months or a year, save up all their money, even working for minimum wage, save up money, go back to Mexico, buy a car, come back again, do another stint, work for a year, save up a bunch of money, go back across the border, buy a house. And because contrary to popular belief, I actually, I don't know if this is a popular belief or not, but not every Mexican wants to live in the U.S. Like,
yeah, very true. I live in California, and I've actually met a lot of people in the Mexican community, and I've learned things like that. And I learned about how a lot of people actually send money back fairly regularly, and then they'll go visit for 3 months or something like that.
Oh, yeah.
And they're only out here to work.
Yeah. So, like, but they were so enthusiastic, and they're also like musical, rhythmic people, and I'm not. I'm the exact opposite. I'm like clumsy, awkward, kind of clunky moving. My wife's, like, and I can blame it on being born premature. So that actually affects motor development, and so I had a little bit of a sort of developmental delay and some developmental hiccups in terms of my hand-eye coordination and things like that. So needless to say, I fit the stereotype of white guys who can't dance. But
you have the passion, though. The passion's there that can be recognized. So
I love music, but I move rather awkwardly to it. And so they really, I mean, because they warmed up to me, and they tried so hard to teach me. Like, they just, and we had such a good rapport. Like, it was so much fun. So one of the things the school would do that we were teaching at is every class they would play a song, and it was an English song, and the students would kind of get the lyrics, and they would kind of sing along, and it was a way to learn English in sort of a more informal sense. And then we talk about the lyrics of the song. Now, for the students, they might only come, 3 classes over the course of a week. So they might only hear the song 3 times. I was teaching 8 classes a day, so I was hearing this dang song, the song of the week, 40 times a week. The one that like sticks out. Oh yeah. So the one that like sticks out on her head was, they try to make me go to rehab, but I said, no. That's an old Amy Winehouse tune. And so we had some students that are like teenagers, and I'm like, I'm not sure if we should be like, because Mexico is still a fairly conservative society, and like Guadalajara is like a more, and it's been 10 years since I've lived there, so I'm sure things have changed since then, of course. But we found that Mexico to be a little bit more conservative as a society, probably due to the Catholic influence. And so, and even though Guadalajara is kind of a more open, sort of progressive place, to be kind of having songs about like, drinking and doing drugs and going to rehab and stuff like that, we're kind of like, do we want to explain this? Yeah. So,
wow, that's quite an experience. So how long were you out in Mexico doing that, and what kind of led you to wanting to leave, considering how much you liked it?
Yeah, we were there for about 6 months. We were sure we were gonna get robbed when we were living down there, because probably by the cops. That's kind of what we thought, because it did happen to some of our colleagues who were also white and clearly not Mexican. One guy, he got pulled over when he was in a taxi. They pulled the taxi over, got him out of the car, and said, "Hey, we found this little bag of cocaine in your pocket." And he was like, "No, you didn't." Taxi driver was like, "Shut up, you idiot." "Yes, they did." Like, don't be stupid. And so basically, he had 400 pesos in his pocket, so he just gave them 400 pesos. And at that time, it was converting at maybe, I don't know, 15 to 1. So 400 pesos is maybe like $30 or something. But yeah. And kind of for context, like the wage that we were getting down there was like maybe 50 pesos an hour, give or take. And so it worked out like maybe $4 an hour kind of thing. $3-4 an hour is like the wage. So, $30 is like a day's work. So, but there was like sort of an uptick in violence, and we were starting to see more and more of these black trucks rolling through, these armored trucks rolling through with the federales and stuff. And we're like, it's like, so we kind of weighed the pros and cons. And it's funny, we actually got interviewed one time by this local police station. I could at that time speak reasonably decent Spanish, because I love languages too. But they basically wanted us to say, "Hey, we're down here in Mexico and we're safe."
Just set up some more Petsies.
Yeah. So, and like Guadalajara is a really, really neat city, like historically speaking. Like, and we lived in the Centro Histórico, which is like the old like downtown. So there is an element of it that's kind of beautiful. Yeah. But we lived in like this old hacienda. We were paying, I think, 1,800 pesos a month, which, what's that? Maybe $200 a month or something for rent. And, we had like a shared kitchen, shared bathroom, that kind of thing. But I said, it came complete with like bed bugs and cockroaches and, but thankfully my dad was an exterminator. And so we just called, "Hey, what would you do?" And, he just told us, go to the local hardware store, get this, that kind of stuff. Here's how you kind of kit out your room to, because bed bug bites, I don't know if you've ever had them, but they're like a mosquito bite, except a million times itchier.
Really?
Yeah. So you'll find there's 2, a mosquito bite. If you look carefully, you might see like one bite mark where like their needle or whatever poked into your skin.
Proboscis.
A bed bug has 2. So one is where they actually inject an anesthetic tube into you, and then they inject their feeding tube into you. So you don't actually feel them feeding on you in the night, but you wake up. And so I got some bites on my foot, And so it just felt like my foot was like a flaming ball of itch, if I could just put it that way. So I'm in a class like trying to teach English and like discreetly attempting to stomp on my foot because it was so insanely itchy. Like we ended up getting like tensor bandages and like wrapping our feet tightly just to try to put pressure on it. So don't get bed bug bites.
Yeah, I'm definitely gonna keep clean my. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're not washing your bed sheets, do so now.
Yeah. Yeah, so things like diatomaceous earth, you can sprinkle that around, and so bed bugs can't jump, but what they can do is they can crawl up the wall and fall. And you can look at your mattress, you can look in like the folds of your mattress for like little black dots, which is like their feces, which is they're just kind of excreting, old blood cells and things like that. So you can kind of look in there. And so we like hosed our mattress with rubbing alcohol as well. And then like went to work for the day. We're not going to hang out in a room after just like literally dousing the whole thing in rubbing alcohol. And then we put like reverse duct tape around the legs of the bed, and we pulled the bed away from the wall so they couldn't sort of like jump onto us.
Wow. I think something so small is like, I need to get up there. Let me just like, that's crazy. That's one of those things that nature does that you're like, okay,
yeah,
what's going on here?
Yes. So, but you were asked about, in terms of why we ended up leaving because, I'd say we could kind of read the writing on the wall a little bit. We're like, oh, okay, you know what? Looks like, things are kind of getting a little rougher here. Not so sure I want to stay here, kind of thing. And so we ended up applying for jobs in Italy. And we got them. Okay. I thought my wife for sure would get it because she's like a children's entertainer. But I'm like, I'm ex-military. Like, who's going to hire me to be a children's English teacher in Italy?
Right. But they kindergarten cop, right? So
right. And so then we took off. We went to Cancun for a week. I got the most hellish sunburn of my life. So because Guadalajara is such a moderate, sort of temperate place in terms. Then we went to Cancun, and I went to swim in the ocean for a couple hours. Didn't think about it. Came back in, and I was like, oh man, my skin feels a little bit sore. Kind of went for a nap, woke up, and my skin was like purple. I looked like an Oompa Loompa. And so, it was brutal.
Man. I've had severe burn in just a single location. To wake up purple must have been agonizing.
Yeah. And the interesting thing is it like stopped at my elbow because like my forearms, I've been wearing t-shirts all the time. So my forearms had been like exposed to the sun, and like it stopped at my neck as well. So like my neck and face didn't get burned, but everywhere, like my torso, it looked like I was wearing a purple t-shirt essentially. Oh, wow. And then of course it starts to blister. So we flew from like Cancun to New York, and we're hanging out in New York for a bit. And I had to like stuff tissues up my sleeves of my shirt and put rubber bands around it because these blisters are weeping now, and I didn't want like, it was awkward to have them like dripping, but you don't want to burst them because you don't want them to get infected. So I'm like covered in weeping blisters. And then the next stage is then all the skin starts to flake and dry off. And so imagine standing up and having like a chest full of dandruff, like the size of cornflakes falling off, and try to like brush that off in public. So it was like, yeah. So we ended up flying to Iceland. And if you haven't been to Iceland, I highly, highly recommend it. Such a cool country.
My uncle's been over there. It looks beautiful.
Oh yeah, one of the safest countries in the world. Like we hitchhiked around there, but they have this blue lagoon, which is really famous. Like it's because it's between the airport in the city called Keflavik and the main city called Reykjavik, where like 80% of their population lives. Mm-hmm. And so there's this blue lagoon. So we went to the blue lagoon, and they have this white silica mud that you rub on your skin that's supposed to be good for your skin. So I was literally caking my skin in this stuff, being like, please just do something for my poor torso, because I've been sleeping in a chair trying not to like lean on anything, Yeah. So yeah. And so then we ended up going to the UK and then heading over to Italy to kind of start work there.
So how long were you over there?
We spent probably, we would have got there in like mid 2011 because we left in 2010. Actually, no, sorry. It would have been like mid 2010. We got over there. Cause we were like January to June in Mexico. And then we went over to Europe, and then we were in Italy for, until September. And then we went over to see my brother, who was living in Turkey at the time.
Okay. And
from there we ended up getting job offers in Poland, and we would have never thought to go to Poland, but we got this job offer. So like, does it sound legit?
So you've been trotting to different countries with, well, Italian and Spanish is relatively similar, but different languages. How was that? Because I know you said you enjoyed them, but do you know many languages, or was that just like, we're going to figure it out?
It was let's figure it out as we go. Now, I'd like to say I think I pick up languages pretty good. Now, I did have, when I was at university, prior to knowing my wife, I did have a Mexican girlfriend, like from Monterrey in Mexico, and so that's a funny story too. So we're going to go back just a little bit here, back in the time machine. But here I'm at university, and I decided I want to take Spanish as an elective because we learned French in school normally, and it's like I want to take Spanish. It's more widely spoken around the world. I want to go to South America. I think Spanish is way more useful than French, and we didn't like the Quebecois back then. The French speaking. Now I don't mind them, but back then we had this sort of rivalry going between English and French speakers in Canada. But so my university offered this this program where you get paired up with a native language speaker. So like someone from another country gets paired up with you. Like I wanted to learn Spanish, so they paired me up with a Spanish speaker. Well, in my application, I said, "Hey, I'd like to be paired with like a hot girl."
And they're like, "No problem, Poppy."
And I was like, for sure, they're totally not. They're not. They're gonna like reject my application and everything. The exact opposite. They paired me up with a very attractive Mexican girl, and we actually ended up dating for a little while there. So that helped my Spanish a little bit. That's
a good way to learn más palabras.
Yeah. So it was, that wasn't a relationship that was meant to be. It was just kind of,
meant to experience.
Yeah, she was a little bit loco as well, and she had tried to teach me salsa too. And it was actually at a salsa club that she invited me to. And it was like Valentine's Day, and she dragged me in the corner and just started making out with me. And I was a little bit taken aback because like Mexican, well, at least my experience, because there was a whole cohort of like Mexican students at our university, and so they were all hanging out together. And so I kind of observed, I guess, like, wow, like these Mexican girls are really forward compared to like more reserved, Canadian girls, where it's like a little bit more like she didn't even like there was like no discussion about it. She just dragged me into a corner and started making out with me. I was like, okay. I mean, I was like 20, 21 years old at the time, so I'm like, yeah, okay, whatever. I'm not complaining, but I didn't expect it to sort of play out like that. But so it was that was a bit of fun there. But that one didn't last. So anyway, so that's how I Canadian, eh?
Yeah. So you went out to Italy, and then you went out to Poland. And I'm noticing that these are short jaunts. Were you like working in like a contract kind of fashion, or was it just you were looking for the jobs, and because you had that Wanderlust, you wanted to keep going somewhere else?
Well, I mean, we joke. People say, "Well, how did you manage to finance like your travels?" And I say, "Oh, we sold drugs to kids." And teaching English was a great pipeline to them.
Right?
Yeah. I'm kidding. Don't do that. I didn't do that. Okay, it was a joke. Whatever.
We don't condone selling drugs.
Yeah. No,
and we don't condone pharmaceutical selling to children either. But
Yeah. Well, we don't want to get censored here, though. So
yeah,
we'll just put that one right
this
in the
is
shiny
my first show hosting. I'll get in trouble if we get censored.
So Italy, we were there kind of for the summer, like part of July and August, and then we went over to Turkey, and we were there for like a little bit before. It was kind of like mid-September where we went over to Poland, and. We couldn't even probably pick Poland on a map, to be truthful, and we didn't really have any like great desire to go there. But it was a job offer. We're like, okay, it's kind of in Central Europe, and we could use as like a travel hub to travel around Europe. So we stayed there for a year. Now, Poland is a totally different story than Mexico. Where in Mexico, like everybody is like warm and hospitable and friendly and like excitable and just social, and Poland was like ice cold. Like it was like a shock, like Canadians are a little bit reserved and we're polite and whatever. Poland was like, they knew we were Polish.
Right. And especially like as Mexicans have their tumultuous culture that they're dealing with, but they also still maintain what they're known for. Poland fairly recently in their history was rocked in a terrible situation that generationally, I would still feel kind of cold as well, especially when winter didn't go anywhere. They still got to deal with that.
The thing with Poland is, so I read this book written by an author, James, can't think of his last name. I want to say James Michener, but I might have it wrong. But it actually covers Polish history from about 900 AD to 1980. So it covers about 1,000 years of Polish. Yeah. Now it was written as a fictional story, but a fictional story woven into actual history. So it gives you it's and so it gave me this understanding of Polish culture, which actually I really kind of grew to have at least a degree of appreciation for, like their history.
Hmm.
So in they saved Europe twice, actually. So in the 1600s, for example, the Sultan, like the Ottoman Empire was on the march, and the Sultan, I can't think of his name, but anyways, he sent his general out to go and conquer Europe. And so and the Ottoman armies, they were a lot different than the European armies. The European armies were like these heavily armored, like big horses, big heavily armored, tanks of guys kind of thing. And the Ottoman army was like, they were a lot more lightweight and agile and nimble. They were pretty good archers and horseback, and so they would do things like fight a battle of attrition where they just pick you off and pick you off and pick you off. And they were really frustrating to fight with. And so they got all the way to the gates of Vienna, and the Emperor of Vienna fled away like a little girl and was like, and this is one of the parts of history that Poland is like quite proud of. They have this very famed cavalry unit called the Winged Hussars, and they're this elite cavalry unit. And they would like decorate their armor with like eagle feathers and things like that. And it's said that, but I don't know if this actually ever been verified, but they would put eagle feathers in their armor so that when they would hunch over their horses and do a charge, it would create like a whistling kind of screaming sound. And it would, yeah. So with about 300 soldiers, they were up against like 10,000 of these Turks, and they smashed them in a totally unexpected fashion and forced them to retreat. But then the Emperor of Vienna comes running back and goes, I saved the city, get the heck out of here, kind of thing. And so the Poles never really got an appreciation for it. Now, here's a part that gets missed in this story. 25 years earlier, the Swedes had come down from the north and decimated 40% of the Polish population. So at that time, Poland's population was around 10 million, and they killed 4 million Poles.
Wow.
It was the deluge. And then the Swedes left. I'm like, you jerks. You come down and like, wipe out like 4 million of them, and then you leave. And then 25 years later, because it was a conflict between sort of like, because Poland is Catholic, right? So it's very interesting. They went from like Mexico to Italy to Poland. We went from like one Catholic country to another Catholic country to another one, and seeing totally different versions of Catholicism as well. So, the Swedes were like Lutheran and not Orthodox, but anyways, they were Protestant. Sorry. And so, there was battles between like Catholics and Protestants and things like that. So they came down, they 25 years earlier, they wiped out Poland. But then, hey, when Islam's on the march, it's like, hey, all us Christians stop fighting with each other. We're going to come together against a common enemy here. Poland, please help us. We're getting our butts whooped by the Ottoman Empire. And it's funny, my brother lives in Turkey now, but so that was one of the times. But then Poland got wiped off the map for 123 years. And few people know this, but I don't know how much taught in history over here, but like the Prussian Empire, which is pre-Germany, took a part of it. The Austro-Hungarian Empire took like a south, and then the Russian sort of federation took like a third of it as well. And so Polish language was outlawed. There's Polish patriots that fled underground. They kept the language alive by going to foreign countries, and like Chopin, this French composer, is actually Chopina. He's a Pole.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, those dang Frenchies, they take credit for Chopin when he's actually Polish.
Why is this, you French?
Yeah. Well, and then like Copernicus is actually Mikołaj Kopernik. He's Polish as well.
If there's one thing I can tell you about these last 2 years, the inaccuracy of information in history has been becoming blatantly obvious, because it's like, oh, you didn't know? Like, of course. That's why everybody thinks French fries are from France, because we just assume. It has nothing to do with France.
In Greece.
Yeah. See?
But that was terrible.
But it's an American food. No,
that was actually a terrible dad joke. I just slipped that one in under the radar. Like,
shit. You know what? Wow. And that was caught on live. That got me on live. You saw it here, folks. Man, I guess it wasn't that bad because it got me.
Oh, yeah. So, and then so Poland had this history where they weren't on the map, and then of course, World War I happens, and after it, in 1919, now the Russian army's on the march, and sort of this communistic force is heading towards Europe, and they're actually forming this pincher movement around Poland, and they vastly outnumber the Poles, and everyone's just expecting Poland to fall, and then Germany's next in line, and Germany's just been battered by World War I, and just ripe, and it's like communism's going to take over Europe, nobody expected the Poles to fight back way harder than they thought. I'm like, this is kind of weird timing given what's taking place in Ukraine right now. But anyways, the Poles fought with their backs against the wall incredibly hard and beat back the Russians, and the Russian infantry had to leave. Basically, they had to retreat. And so now, I mean, now it's a different situation. I'm not sure I want to dive into that cauldron either. But
back then, winter was a strategic advantage. Now it doesn't really matter.
Yeah. So they saved Europe from the Ottoman Empire and Islam, if you want to say they got saved from that. And then they saved Europe from the march of communism as well. And then but the problem is Poland's a flat country. There's like a border of mountains in the south and the rest of it's flat. And so you got Germany to the west, Russia to the east. You get rolled over multiple times in your history. Like, no wonder they're standoffish and cold, because they've been like,
Yeah, they don't really have good reason to trust outsiders.
Yeah. So learning Polish history is fantastic. Now, learning the Polish language, on the other hand, oh my gosh. So in Mexico, I'll just contrast this. In Mexico, my Spanish wasn't perfect, but I could function. Sometimes I confuse por and para, but I could function, and I had a reasonable degree of understanding, because when you hear it all the time, eventually your brain starts to tune into it, and so on. And it would be funny when we go to shops and they would try to rip us off because clearly we're not Mexican, and they were like, "Hey, I live here. Nice try.
No
10 pesos, not 100. Thank you very much." I can read too,
right?
But in Poland, but Mexicans they're so encouraging when we tried to learn the language. They get excited about it. Yeah, keep going. Come talk to my grandma. And all of this. Right. And so that's what I loved. I loved like the warmth of their culture. Clearly, I love Mexican food as well. So, so Poland, complete opposite. Like, they're not used to people trying to learn their language. And so the way that the Soviet Union divvied up Eastern Europe was, if you're Polish, you live in Poland. If you're Ukrainian, you live in Ukraine, and so on. And so very homogenous populations. They're not used to foreigners coming in. And who the heck wants to learn Polish? Why would you ever learn Polish? Except that you were born in Poland, or you live in Chicago, which has the largest Polish population outside of Poland.
That's that delicious Polish dog.
Yeah. So us trying to learn Polish, and it's a hard language. Like, it is a phonetic language, and it's written using our alphabet, the Latin alphabet. And they did that because they're a Catholic country, but they should have used the Cyrillic alphabet, which is the one that say Russian, Ukrainian, Bulgarian.
I actually thought it was Cyrillic.
No, but they use Z in a similar fashion to how we use H, and they have a lot more sort of they call it like a whispering language, like dzień dobry, jak się masz, wszystko dobrze, no tak, and it's like or if I was to count to 10, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. It's like the like it's
it's almost like you're shushing your words. Like there's a shush behind it.
The way that it works grammatically is different than English. So in English, we have like subject, object, verb, like or subject, verb, whatever it is. I threw that ball. Subject, verb, object. I taught English, and you'd think I know this stuff. But in Polish, it's not really the order of words that matters, and it's really like kind of this mind-bending concept if you didn't learn to speak Polish. What it is they have this grammatical thing called I can't remember. It's like the endings of their word changes depending on the function of the word. So let's say their noun cases or declensions is the term. Like anybody cares. There's no test on this, but they're called declensions, right? So 7 possible. So one's called nominative, for example, and that's like the generic version. Dative might indicate a time. Locative would indicate a location, and so on.
Right.
And so the function of the word tells you and then you have 3 genders, male, female, neutral, and then singular and plural. So you have 35 possible endings for every word, depending on the function of the word. Yeah, you try to wrap your head around that one.
Sheesh.
And so they always knew I wasn't Polish just because they said it's your demeanor. Clearly, you're not Polish.
You're intimidated by this, so obviously you're not.
Yeah, you smile. That you are not Polish because you smiled in public. I'm like your average friendly Canadian who's like really trusting, like, hey everybody, it's so nice to be here in Poland. They're like,
why isn't everybody smiling, eh?
yeah. So I remember like the first time, like just trying to buy bus tickets, and a really simple transaction, and it's like dwie bilety poproszę, and I it's not great, but I mean, 10 years later, I can still remember some of these phrases, which is pretty good. Yeah. But the ticket lady was like, nie rozumiem, I don't understand. And I was like, looked at my phrase book. I'm like, I'm pretty sure I said it the way the phrase book says. Dwie białe poproszę, and she was like, don't understand. So it was like you had to get it perfect phonetically for them to say, I understand what you're trying to say, because they're not used to somebody screwing up their language. In English, you picture like somebody from India talking to someone from Scotland, talking to someone from, Texas.
Okay.
We're used to hearing English spoken in so many different like inflections and dialects, or so bring an Asian person into this country, so you get 4 different people from different parts of the world speaking English with their own individual accents, and we can all kind of figure it out. Laddie, I'll take to Bear's place, and
I know what you're saying there.
Yeah, that's a bit more Irish there. Hey, laddie, but then you get some, hey, y'all,
the different accents. There was actually a gentleman who came into my job who was French, and I understood every word he said except the last word. He's like, hello, I am looking for a samba. And I'm like, a samba? A samba? And then I thought about a sound bar. Yeah, samba. And I'm like, okay, so that's the bar, that's how they speak their language being caught onto English, which we don't make that sound, which is where a lot of the accent comes from, is because I guess it would be phonetically, I'm not exactly which, tonally, it's not the same thing. It's not coming from the same place, and it's not coming from the same part of the brain. Sometimes it seems like, because Polish sounds much more akin to like a traditional Chinese or like Cantonese, I believe, because of how specific in the tone you need to be, because if you change that tone and the way you say it, it's going to change the entire word or the intention of the word.
Well, in one sense, I would say it's probably almost as hard as learning Mandarin. Actually, Mandarin. I think Cantonese is probably more difficult, because Cantonese has 9 tones versus Mandarin, which only has 4 apparently. So I had a roommate from Singapore, and you could, one word said with one tone could mean hello, and the other one could mean F you, when it's exactly. Like, and you just switch the tone. But in Polish, it's not that they necessarily have tones. It's that if you don't say it the exact correct way, they say, I don't understand. And so it was a really, and a lot of them, they understand some English, and of course, if you go to the bigger cities, they do speak some English and whatnot, but they won't speak it, because in their head they're like, I don't speak it perfectly, so I won't speak it. So now you try to teach people in this capacity.
Yeah, so each time you were teaching English as a foreign language in each of these countries.
Yeah, so I went from in Mexico, where I'm singing Amy Winehouse and dancing with my class, and they're laughing at my stupid dance moves, to, trying to teach rowdy children in Italy, and being like a big, tall, like, physical, imposing presence. Like, Italian children are the worst behaved children in the world. They're insane. They're out of control. And so I just walked,
I saw The Godfather. He just watched his grandpa die and just poisoned him.
Yeah. So I would walk in there all intimidating, and it's funny because we'd have like these like female like teachers that would come in, and we're running English camps, really not English classes, but more like English camps that have some classroom component to it. And they'd be like, oh my gosh, they're so cute, la di da di da. I'm like, no, they're not. They're little monsters. You just wait. and so I'd walk in there, I wouldn't crack a smile. And I would, so I could, and Italy still has like they really sort of distinguish between masculine and feminine, like, and men, and their whole, it's a bit silly when you look at it from the outside, but the whole like machismo thing and all this, you get this like 50-year-old sort of overweight, paunchy, balding Italian guy, grabbing his crotch, being like, hey baby, trying to talk to these young drunk American girls being, in the bar or something. And it's like, yeah, you're 52, bald, and with a paunch on you, she's like 19, and, with some husky, guy over here, like, no interest, fella. But they seem to have no, it's kind of fun.
So,
go ahead.
So I know we've just been talking a lot here, and we haven't actually gotten to what you do.
Oh, yeah.
You've had quite the fascinating life so far, but I wanted to get up to that point. And now, after Poland, was that when you went into Africa?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. So just to kind of recap on it for people, just because I know there's other interviews there, and I kind of want to let you talk about your podcast a little bit and such.
Oh, yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong at any points here, but you had gone out there. You were there for a while teaching English as well. And then I cannot recall the context of why, but I know that you became under attack after a while. Now, were you becoming under attack because of the fact that you were teaching English And that just was, or was it entirely random?
Sort of. The you remember that skin tone?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, in South Africa, I stand out even more.
Oh, okay. See, that detail I had missed. It was South Africa specifically.
Yeah. Now, I
Okay.
mean, my best friend is Haitian, and so
Mhm.
it's funny. He grew up in Canada. He was adopted and grew up in Canada, and grew up driving pickup trucks and listening to country music. But anyways, he's like uncle to my kids. But anyway, so I'm in South Africa, and we're actually teaching underprivileged youth life skills to help improve their employability, like simple things like communication,
Okay.
writing resumes, and writing cover letters, and how to interview and what service looks like. And we're preparing them for work in hospitality. So it was a
Okay.
slightly different job than teaching English, but we were out on a nature reserve, and it was kind of out there. And I don't know what we have for time on the clock here, but so we'll.
Honestly, as if you have the time, we have the time to talk as well.
Oh, let's roll, man.
Yeah.
Because life gets really kind of interesting here, because this is about 10 years ago now, and like the last 10 years of my life have been those 10 that the earlier stretch was like a lot of fun. This one got a little bit more messy. So I got jumped by 4 guys at night, and they tried to beat me to death, and it was very much connected to this old lack of melanin in my skin. Now it had nothing to do with me, the person. They didn't know who I was. But they jumped me out on this reserve here, like at night when I was walking back to my instructor's cabin. They'd been hiding in the bushes, like waiting. And I'm really grateful it was me that was walking back to the cabin and not my wife, because it probably would have been a different outcome had they jumped her. And so, and these guys, they smashed me over the head with the bricks, like they, caught me off guard. It was, I remember like screaming for help. And what I remember the most, the thing that sticks out of my head is this guy. I had a shirt similar to this, like a collared shirt, because I like golf shirts. He grabbed this part of my shirt, and he like looked me right in the eye with a big smile on his face as he's swinging this brick at my head, and just said, "Shh." And it was so like soul disturbing, like this, with violent intention and enjoying his violence that he was inflicting on me. And here I was, like, working for an NGO for like a stipend to help underprivileged youth. Not that I'm like some kind of savior or anything. I don't mean that, but I just mean here we are in the country, kind of almost voluntarily working with people to try and help them better their lives. And this guy was just smiling as he's smashing me over the head with a brick, kind of thing. So it was a pretty intense situation, and kind of the fallout from that. Well, it was, at first it was like, they're not going to win, we got trapped in the building with our students, and our students were just as like, they weren't attacked necessarily, but we were kind of held hostage in this building. These guys are trying to smash down the doors. We didn't know how many were out there, because they often travel in gangs. And it was so interesting because South Africa is very diverse. So the white population is only about, maybe it's like 7%. So it's not a lot. People seem to think there's a lot of white. There's not a lot. It's about 80% black. There's about 10% colored, which is like mixed race. And then there's about 7% white, which is kind of split half and half between English and Afrikaans. And then you have about 3% South Asian. So that's like India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and so on. But within the black community in South Africa, this is not a homogenous group. There is like 8 different major ethnic tribes within South Africa. And then there's also like others who come from other regions, let's say, for example, like Nigerians and so on. And there's a lot of inter-tribal conflict. And it's not pleasant, because there's a lot of cultural differences between these different ethnic groups. So they have different linguistic, different languages. They have different like cultural beliefs. They all have some kind of rite of passage from like boyhood to manhood, from girlhood to womanhood, and so on. But they're different from each other. And so they are often in conflict with each other, because like my culture is superior to yours, and it's a real insult to call someone a boy if they've been through whatever ritual they have in their culture to take you to manhood and so on. And like the Zulu folks, they're out on the East Coast more. The Coloreds are more out in the West Coast, in like Cape Town area. But the Zulu folks, they're like the big, aggressive, like they were a very warlike people throughout history. Shaka Zulu is a very famous warrior. What doesn't get talked about is they are not indigenous to that area either. There's actually a San Bushmen, were like these really small, almost not quite pygmy, but really small people that were really, really skilled trackers, and they were like spirit trackers, and really quite a fascinating culture. Well, they were almost completely annihilated by the Zulus in a genocide. But I mean, this is, I don't know, long before, like this is a few hundred years ago, but it really doesn't get talked about, right? So there's a lot of ethnic tension there as well. the way that people get brought together is if you can create division between the blacks and the whites primarily. That's where you create even more sort of political tension, that sort of thing. But as a country, it's been trapped in a cycle of violence for a very long time, and it's not exclusively black to white or things like that. Like there's a lot of inter-ethnic violence as well. So it's really tragic because, like, again, a lot of South African people, beautiful people, like, oh man, like amazing singers and dancers, like our students that we would be teaching, like, and again, they would just love this white guy trying to dance. They would just laugh their heads off. Like, they weren't making fun of me. They thought it was the funniest thing, though, this guy trying to dance. And they tried to teach me. They're really gracious about it, like if you were to remove the violent aspect of the society, and it's a lot of them are victims of violence, and then violence perpetuates violence and so on. And violence is incredibly common. 1 in 2 women have been raped, and 1 in 4 have been gang raped. Like these are the sorts of things that don't get talked about down there. It's so like it's almost like overwhelming to like learn about these things. And a very significant portion of the population has AIDS. It doesn't get talked about, but it's understood quietly that a lot of the population does. However, there's also quite an element of promiscuity, cultural promiscuity. And if you don't talk about it and so on, so they had to have these big campaigns, even trying to educate people about it and so on. Like, so there's all these complex layers to this culture. And then you think about, like, yes, the colonial countries in one sense did come down and kind of exploit and so on. But it's like, so you throw all of that together in this melting pot, and you're going to get like this country filled with unrest, essentially. It's like almost hard to find its identity. So I look back and I observe, and it's really, really fascinating in a sense. But so anyways, that's just a little bit of backstory. Now, South Africa is gorgeous. It's beautiful, beautiful coastline, beautiful beaches, incredible wildlife. Like there's and that's why I think it's a real tragedy. It's also resource rich. So you have this beautiful, naturally beautiful, resource rich country that is probably the most prosperous or wealthy country in the African continent.
Yeah, there's been recent political turmoil in that regard. Been hush hush on the news, but there's been a lot going on in regards to those resources.
Yeah, I'm willing to bet there's one. What was his name? Because when we were there, he was the leader of the youth wing of the ANC, or the African National Congress. So that's historically the Black People's Party is the African National Congress. Then you have the Democratic Party, which interestingly was led by a Jewish lady, or was at the time that we were down there, out in the Western Cape. And the African National Congress hated that this lady was running this Democratic Party because she was doing a really good job of it. Like, people, like, didn't matter what color you were, she was doing a good job. The African National Congress is very corrupt. But if people tried to call out the corruption, they would play like the raise card, they would get angry, and stuff like that. Like, it's just, but it was a lot of like rigged tenders and, that sort of like corporate crony capitalism kind of thing. And so the average like Black folks in South Africa really suffered under this. But then those political elite, because make no mistake, there's an elite wealthy class of Black folks in South Africa that some have come by it honestly, but many have come by it through political corruption. They'll point a finger at someone else to turn away from the fact that they have 16 houses in the richest district in Johannesburg and be like, it just happens. I'm really good with money. And it's like, right. Yeah. So, and it's weird because I'm like, in almost every political conflict, doesn't matter like where in the world it is, you see like an elite class of people that just take advantage of and control and try to control the population and extract wealth from like this, that's a whole nother kettle of fish as well. But
yes.
Anyway, so all of this to say, South Africa is a really beautiful country. It's almost like a tortured country, if we could put it that way, because there's so many layers and so much complexity to its history. And so it's a tragedy because it's so beautiful. And when the people aren't trying to, when you're not having violence inflicted on you, when you're able to just have civil, normal interactions, they're beautiful people down there, and they want to be hospitable. And like when like my students were so distraught that we were attacked because they really enjoyed us, they didn't care about our skin color. They were happy that we were there trying to help them. Like some of them told them that they loved us, and we're like, man, I wonder if they've ever told, like, it sounds weird, but like, I wonder if they ever told a white person before they loved them, because, but we weren't South African. Pardon me. So we didn't play a role in their minds. We didn't play a role in the oppression of them because we came from somewhere else in the world, kind of thing. So When we stayed down there after that was only one incident of about 13 that happened in the 5 or 6 months we lived down there. That was the most violent one. But there comes a point where it's like you can't take it anymore. It's we were probably on the verge of some kind of like mental breakdown. Like I was so sick of our house being broken into and getting robbed, like our stuff stolen all the time. I was ready to set traps and inflict violence on people. And of course, remember, go ahead.
I was actually curious about that when you had mentioned that in an interview. I was like, he's ex-military. I was wondering, like, did that kind of start to get kicked back in? I was like, look, I don't want to, but at this point, I do remember some things, and I will just end this. But I imagine at the same time you understood that would mean escalation more than likely than not.
Yeah. It's interesting because in the military, you actually try to de-escalate things as much as possible. Generally, well, at least in the Canadian military. I can't speak for the American military.
From what I've been told from my friends of mine that are veterans and such, that is what you're supposed to do.
Yes. Is to try to de-escalate the situation. Supposed to. So I knew that like when I got to the place that I was having thoughts of inflicting violence on people, that I was like, this isn't who I am. This is not my character. Like I have to get out of here because one way or another, a situation's going to end badly, whether it ends badly on my end or on someone else's end. And I really wouldn't want to live with myself, in a moment of rage. It's like shocking what a human being can do. But I would know that my life would be filled with regret if I was to inflict violence on another human being. I'm not a violent person. I'm a huggy teddy bear, So we knew we had to get out of there, and we went back to Australia. Lived over there for a bit. Decompressed psychologically, mentally, emotionally, and I kind of went into this period of like now I'm dealing with PTSD. Right, you go through trauma, and then you layer a bunch of other micro traumas on top of a big T trauma, and be totally unequipped to deal with it, like emotionally, mentally, just. Who tells you? Where on earth do you learn about how to deal with trauma? Well, you kind of figure it out when you have no other choice, when your head's just filled with all of these like, raging thoughts, traumatic thoughts, anxious thoughts, like just wild mood swings. And, and there's a part of your brain going, what the hell is going on? And is there a way out of this? Like, is this going to be my life for the rest of my life? Like it's, so I hit some pretty low points in there as well, because I'm like, I don't know how to escape from my own head. And I don't want these thoughts in my head, but they just keep coming in and keep coming in. So, I went through a really kind of a dark period in my life, and I really got to give a shout out to my wife because, we've been together for 17 years. She's been with me when I was, fit and getting ready for boot camp and just kind of a young, cocky idiot. She's been with me when I'm like a traumatized, I gained 120 pounds, like traumatized, morbidly obese guy, just struggling to even find myself, who I was. After going through all of this, I could put a mask on, I could put a shell on, I could operate in public, but on the inside I was really tortured and withdrawn. And like, it was just a really, really difficult place to be mentally. And again, we think back, historically, men don't talk about this. We don't talk about mental and emotional health. We don't want to show weakness. So I grappled with all of these things and sort of what I felt like it meant to be a man and not wanting to be weak. But, there came a point in about mid 2016, I want to say, so going back about 6 more years. So sort of halfway between now and when that incident happened to me. And I was getting multiple panic attacks a day, and it was just crippling me. Like it was hard to function. And I was like, I just, I can't keep doing this. And so my doctor, he said, like, we can give you a medication, because I'd really, really tried not to like use medications. I wanted to, I thought maybe I could, somehow conquer this naturally or something like that. And so anyways, he tried me on a medication, but it made me feel like a zombie. And it actually, I'm glad we tried it. And this is no knock on anybody who uses medication to manage their mental health at all. But I felt that I would rather go through a 45-minute panic episode than 12 hours of feeling like a zombie and knowing there's no escape from it until that medication wears off.
And escape, you essentially become a prisoner of your own body.
Yeah. So, and describing it, I look back now from where I am now, like mentally and emotionally, I'm in a very good place. I've got help, and it really inspires the work that I do now. And I wouldn't take these experiences out of my past, because I really had to go basically that journey through hell, in a sense, hell on earth, hell internally, hell in my mind. And I wouldn't be able to understand people the way that I do now, the way that I work with people now, except that I had to go through this lived experience myself that was just, life-changing. And then, of course, just to throw something else in the mix, I also had a business with a business partner who was a narcissist and a sociopath, like he's a pathological liar. And I didn't know how to look for that in people because nobody talked about it, right?
Mm.
And I got taken advantage of. And that when that business collapsed, I lost, my life savings and a lot of money that I invested in this business, and had to walk away with just a mountain of debt.
Mm.
And just like when I was getting, into a good place with my mental health, and whump, this all comes crashing down. I'm thinking this is going back about 4 years now.
Mm.
And then I got to go to my wife and be like, that business we thought we were building, this, this sort of like, productive asset we thought we were developing, all of this, it was all a shell. I was being taken advantage of. It was crooked accounting, all this kind of stuff. And whump, this thing collapses and I got nothing. I'm like, and there's a few times in that experience or in this stretch where, I said to my wife, you can go back to Australia. You don't have to be stuck here, trapped with me, trapped in all this. This isn't what you signed up for, and so on. And again, shout out to her, man, because she was like, I'm not leaving you. Like, we're in this. We're in this. When I signed that dotted line and we made our vows and we said till death do us part, and I am not leaving this. And so, I'm fiercely loyal to my wife because in like, she's seen me like in the worst of things and would not leave me. Even though I offered her a way out, she refused because she knows who I am. She like, she said to me, like, I knew that you were always in there. I didn't know how to help you get out, kind of thing.
So would you say that your ability to actually get to a place where you're in a healthier mental state, able to assess things healthier, came from your retrospective analyzation of traumas you had been through and realizing that you had not actually addressed them, you've just gone past them, and those weights were what was actually holding you back, and by going and addressing them, like in the interview, you decided that even though you were never going to meet them, you forgave those men. Was that kind of what helped you kind of catalyze a whole bunch of different ones, or was that really just kind of the main thing that was holding you down, or was that just
you've heard me tell some of my story before, because I say forgiving those men, I never saw them again, but forgiving them for what they did to me was one of the best things I could have ever done. And people would wonder, like, are you nuts? How could you forgive someone who happily would have killed you? And I really said, well, one, I got tired of the rage. It's so draining to be angry all the time, or to have flashes of anger, impulses, like just this emotional roller coaster. It's just exhausting. And I realized that forgiveness wasn't about absolving them for what they did. It wasn't about saying, well, hey, it was no big deal, but it was about setting myself free. And so what I would do is when I would feel this like rage coming up in me, and when I would have these angry and violent kind of thoughts and ruminations, and I would then try to cultivate a sense of compassion for these men. And so I would really ask the question, what happened to them in their life that got them to this place where they thought this was an appropriate course of action? How did they get here? And again, it's not a get out of jail free card. It's not to say their behavior was acceptable because they had a hard past, but it was to say, if I could at least cultivate a level of understanding for them and how they got there, I can at least forgive them. Because call me naively optimistic, but I really don't believe people are necessarily born with a desire to inflict, harm and violence and murder on other people.
I agree with you. And I also agree that understanding does not mean condoning. I think people use that as an excuse to not go through the exercises that it requires of oneself in order to get to that place. Because we think it's just a choice. It's not that easy. You have to have the capacity to have that kind of love within you, to have that kind of forgiveness. And people don't even realize love is a multi-tiered thing outside of romance. And you need to have love for your fellow man. It's that love for your fellow man and understanding that even though you brought me to the edge here, I understand that you could have been brought to the same edge or even farther, or things far worse. At the end of the day, I think it was, I can't remember his name, but there was a famous philosopher who spoke about if you believe that your experience is the worst experience on planet Earth, like it's ridiculous. I'm terribly paraphrasing there, but there's definitely an experience that's worse than the one that you're having. Even if you're at the rock bottom here in America, you're poor, you have nothing. You could be poor and have nothing in another country where you know nothing, nobody, you have no means of communication. There could be wildlife. It could get worse. And if you have the ability to recognize that and create a foundation, an actual floor, so you can't keep falling, then you can start building so you can start rising again. And I feel like that's something that clearly just hearing your story and the things you've been through
Yeah.
must have been part of your ability to get to where you are now. Because you don't
Yeah.
exude somebody who's in a dark place. You exude somebody who is learned in the things that they had been through and is trying to exude that to
Yeah.
others.
It's, like I'd say, I really have a lot of joy in my life now. And that's not to say my life is perfect or it's ideal. I mean, I have stressors. I've got a young son. He's just going to be turning a year old here shortly. Becoming a father is like the most beautiful thing, but it's also an exhausting thing, as any parents will tell you. And I'm like, I got one. I don't know how people do it with four. I don't know. Maybe you just got to really, but maybe it's like there's such a it's such a shift because I was like 39 when my son was born. So you can imagine I lived nearly 4 decades of my life without being a parent and living this life of sort of freedom and adventure and freewheeling and traveling and all of this. And then of course COVID hits and my son is born. Um, but there's something about like just being a parent that like he's like a best teacher I could ever have,
Mhm.
And I what I love is like the place that I'm in. So I look, if I had been a dad 5 years earlier or 10 years earlier, I would not have made a good dad. I would have wanted to be a good dad, but
Mhm.
wouldn't have the degree of sort of understanding and compassion and that I do
Mhm.
now. Like, just tonight, before hopping on this call, I was, I do jammy time. It's like one of my favorites usually because, I change his diaper, put his jammies on, kind of, blow raspberries on his tummy and just, have fun with this adorable little human. But tonight he was not in a great place. And so he was howling his head off like as though I was trying to yank his arms off while I'm changing his diaper, and it's funny because he can flick it like a switch. So I'm like, I know where you get this from, kid. Um,
Mhm.
you know, but where probably younger me would have got like frustrated or angry at him for howling his head off. Instead, I was really calm with him, just chatted with him, said, hey, it's okay. You're just telling me how you feel, you know. And maybe it sounds airy fairy to someone out there listening, but it's like he's using the only communication tool he has to express
Mhm.
the emotional state he's feeling right now. And
Right.
who am I to get angry when he's just trying to tell me I'm tired? I don't know. I'm feeling all these mixed emotions right now. I'm not happy, you know? And
Mhm.
so while it's not enjoyable having him belted out full volume, and he's got a set of lungs in him, it's amazing the volume these kids can crank out. But to be able to have that, like I've also practiced meditation. I'm actually just finishing up my own meditation instructor training as well.
Hmm.
Just the ability to cultivate this calm presence of mind in the face of like this blood curdling screaming that's like 2 inches from your ear. It's actually pretty useful skill. And
Yeah.
I really do have to credit like meditation, introspection, reflection, coaching, therapy, support from my wife, support from my family. Like, man, it's like anybody out there who's struggling, it's like get all the help and support you can and do not feel a shred of shame about asking for help. This human life is like, man, it's tough. Wherever you live, it's tough and it's going to knock you around and kick you and punch you. And, you know, uh, I feel as though, and this is just an observation, but I just wonder if like our younger generation lacks the same degree of emotional resilience as say maybe the generation or two before ours who went through world wars, who went through, the Great Depression, who went through and they did it without electricity. They did it with,
Yeah.
let alone no internet.
Yeah. Snail mail. I don't think
Right.
people even understand. Like, you can't talk to the person on their side of the country. You
Yeah.
can't do that.
Let
Sorry.
alone someone around the world.
Yeah.
And so
In real time, no less.
yeah. And so I think, it's like the key to being happy is to expect life to be this mess. It's like to let go. I think if we've been maybe conditioned to believe or have this idea that the world owes, like the universe should conspire to give me a perfect life. And when we start from that place of entitlement or expectation, and it's really kind of a very self centered, narcissistic way of seeing things that I am so unique and special that the world should conspire to make me wealthy and give me fame and give me everything I want and give me no struggles and so on. And it's like, man, you're in for a world of like disappointment because anyone with a sense of
Mhm.
entitlement really cannot enjoy happiness because entitlement, you can only ever have your expectations met. And most times they're not met and you're left disappointed.
Mhm.
Whereas when you cultivate a sense of gratitude and appreciation for what you have, no matter how small it is, your expectations are being exceeded. And the more times you acknowledge my expectations are being exceeded, I have more than I need or more than I asked for. It's you gain a degree of resilience in the face of difficult circumstances.
Mm. So, how did So let's say you've gotten through the dark period and you're
Yeah.
starting to bring yourself back. What was that kick start that got you not only from feeling better, but you're like, I'm not satisfied with just being healed personally. I want to spread this information, spread this feeling. I need to do
Yeah.
more.
Yeah.
What kind of got you into wanting to do that?
Well, I would say I gotta adjust my butt here. I would say it was a coach who worked with me. So I thought, for example, I just needed to lose weight. I'd be happy if I lost weight. I'd stop hating myself.
Mm,
And like the extra weight was just a reflection of the emotional turmoil in my case. And when he worked with me, and instead of like talking down to me and making fun of me, or like, saying you know better, like why are you doing this, he approached it with this compassionate curiosity. Hey, you know what? You've been through a lot. Let's just try and connect some dots here. Let's figure out what's happened, man. And it really shaped my approach. Like it changed my life because he modeled for me what compassion and self-compassion looked like when I was really, really needing that, and it was missing from my life. And to be taught from other men who I respect, who had accomplished things in life,
mm,
um, it really carried weight. And I think I felt so appreciative for, in particular, this gentleman's work with me that helped me through one of the darkest periods of my life, that I was like, I I need to help other people because I know, like, he's only one guy,
mm,
and I know there's other people out there that have been through this kind of struggle, and so I started doing my own nutrition coaching, and I say nutrition is really the cover story. That's the secret. It's like, yes,
mm.
I'm a qualified nutritionist, and I'm well versed in behavioral psychology. Nutrition is the cover story because food is the emotional anesthetic. It's what it is.
Mhm. It's the one vice that nobody's gonna hold you for
Yeah.
necessarily.
If in all of my trauma, like I became a binge eating food addict, um, and binge eating is this weird beast.
Mhm,
It's like I knew logically this behavior wasn't healthy or helping me, but it doesn't matter because it wasn't coming from the logical part of the brain. It was coming from a much more powerful primal part of my brain that would drive these behaviors. And so, you know, um, you're right. Like drugs and alcohol, had I turned to those instead of food, if food was, it was socially acceptable,
mhm,
and I would encourage others to overeat to kind of mask my own overeating behaviors.
mhm,
And so the the one thing is we can live without drugs and alcohol. It's really hard to live without food. So we're
mhm,
faced with it every day, and we live in a world that's constantly, coercing us to eat and to
mhm,
eat junk food and eat unhealthy food. Like it's a real uphill battle for people. And so even to feel a sense of shame around being overweight, I'm like, let it go, because we live in a world that's basically engineered to make us obese. Our brains have been hijacked. You look at,
mhm.
apps on our phone, social media. You look at additives to food, artificial colors and flavors and sweeteners and things. So there's things our brain there's
Sugar and vegetables.
yeah,
Yeah.
video games, pornography. Like there's these super stimuli that are so beyond our brain's capacity to really process. And so, think about if you've played like this really intensive virtual reality video game where you have these superpowers, and you got the goggles and it's so real. And then you step away from that back into ordinary life. It can't even compare. Like you go
Mhm,
from a dopamine high to like a state of depression. And no wonder you want to go back to that video game. And you think about like the metaverse. I don't know if it's going to go anywhere or not, but something like the metaverse, you're going to create a bunch of depressed people because
yeah.
and disconnected people as well, because you're living in this fantasy world on your couch, probably just getting unhealthier by the moment. And rather than doing something in the real world and creating meaningful human experiences like we're having right now.
Mhm, exactly. You've seen the movie or Ready Player One?
I haven't.
So it's pretty funny. So it's pretty much a dystopian future in the context of things, but the entire world has access to a metaverse like situation where you can put on virtual reality and go into essentially any world, and it's entirely immersive. But
Wow.
real
Yeah.
life is deplorable. It is absolutely, people are living in like junk stacks, and they'll live in like tiny little rooms because they don't care, because they're coming home to get on their virtual reality where they're this person, or they have this, or they have this persona. So they're living life only so they can live a life that they've created somewhere else that doesn't really exist. And as much as I love the idea of Ready Player One and that technology, and to be able to
Yeah.
go into Star Wars and be a Jedi, I would never want to do that over living my own life here. And
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
hard to decide whether or not, when they develop technologies like that, when you see the state of things, if that's not where they're just trying to push us into a greater state of laziness and consumption, such that it's like Wall-E, where we're just
Yeah.
sitting on a bunch of floating chairs, overweight, and not really understanding why we exist, looking at screens all day.
Yeah. That's the thing that like scares me. And so like on the I like my kid sees us on computers because I run an online business, and he sees us on our phones, but I really try like he's not getting any like kid video time or anything like that. You're not watching Peppa Pig or any of this stuff.
Mm,
You're playing with a ball, playing with a book, playing with us,
mm,
anything other than interacting with a screen, because we know what it does to a developing brain to a degree. I mean, we're
mm,
conducting a worldwide experiment on the long-term ramifications, but we know in the short term this is not good
mm.
for developing brain. And so we're going to be like technological Luddites with this kid, because he'll figure it out. I mean, if I can figure out a smartphone at 26, this kid can figure it out, at the age of 10 or something like that. you
Mhm.
know
And it's going
so
to be unavoidable. So, in the very least, if you can prevent it of being just integrated so young, where they can learn to live life, and then that becomes a tool as opposed to
yeah,
like another
yeah,
limb, I
yeah.
think that allows for someone to not have the habitual addictions to technology and its conveniences that we have. Because at the end of the day, all it would take to take out America is turn off the internet.
Yeah,
Just turn it off for a week, and people will lose their minds.
yeah. That's like such an interesting thought experiment. Detonate an EMP. Don't. I mean, obviously, I'm not
Yeah,
calling.
please, please don't do that, my
Yeah,
friends.
yeah. This is literally just me thinking like exactly that. You detonate, an electromagnetic pulse bomb in the atmosphere and fry all the electronics. What skills do we have?
Mhm,
What life skills do we have? Like I can sort of plant a few seeds, and I've got some, maybe stuff stocked up in case, the poop hits the proverbial fan, or things like that. But
mhm,
this drags on for any length of time, and we're all hooped because we're just going to descend into looting and chaos and killing each other.
mhm. For
That
no reason.
It's
For
crazy how
like,
proud of our
because you don't
society
have
is.
the internet, now you have to be have a lack of civility, and it's absolutely insane. But to kind of go back a little bit here, I know you said that you have two podcasts, and then you're working on a third.
I have three now.
Okay.
So yeah, the third one just launched recently a couple of weeks ago. So the first one, my main one, my flagship one, is called Between the Before and After, and that's
Mhm,
really about exploring human stories of overcoming significant obstacles. So the way I think about it is like social media shows you a before and after picture, but it doesn't really give you the depth to expand. We're inspired by stories. So human beings love stories because we read ourselves into them, and stories have like a sticking power in our mind. And when we
right.
read ourselves into another inspiring story, it gives us hope about the possibilities and the potential that lies within us, rather
Mhm,
than just seeing a before and after where we go, I could never, do that. But it's like when you hear the story about the things they went through, like, hey, maybe even hearing my story, somebody might be inspired by that and go, okay,
mhm,
it is possible to get out of PTSD, trauma, food addiction, binge eating, depression, anxiety, you know, like it's not an easy road. And this is like,
mhm.
like I rattle off all those things, and we've talked about it for a little over an hour, but this like covers a 10-year span of my life.
Right.
This didn't,
Yeah,
didn't
there's a
happen.
lot going on there, and there was
No
a lot
21
going
day.
on in the small gaps as well.
Yeah. Yeah. The no 21-day fix for this, the second one is called Wellness Unfiltered. So that's more of a panel discussion with myself and a couple of co-hosts, where we're looking at everything that's wrong with the way that we view health. Like we have a sickness system that's just everyone's waiting for a diagnosis. They're waiting to just
Mhm,
hand me the pill. And so we, because we lack the fundamental knowledge. Like my one of my co-hosts, Chris, she often says like, we've never read the owner's manual for this meat machine we're driving in. you know it's like,
yeah, can't find a download for it either.
Right, right. So it's like we know so little on the average person knows so little about how the body functions, and they just kind of go through life. And it's like we shouldn't be figuring out these things in our mid 30s or 40s or 50s or 60s. Like
Yeah.
and so we're trying to be a contributor to helping people think differently about health, to become a participant as opposed to a patient, and
Mm.
create like education and conversations around this, and show people the different kinds of resources that are actually available and accessible to them outside of the traditional medical paradigm. Then the third one is more like a guilty pleasure for me. It's called "It's Not So Black and White," and this
Mhm.
is a space. The working title of it, as I was like building this out or thinking about what I wanted to do with it, was like a safe space for dangerous conversations. Um,
Okay.
but but I think maybe it sounds less provocative and inflammatory to say it's not so black and white, because really it was not about necessarily incendiary rhetoric or inflammatory conversations, but
Mhm.
actually about civil discourse, nuanced discussion around difficult topics, where we can, because I believe that censorship pushes people into extreme silos. It
Mm.
doesn't, the whole from Game of Thrones, it was that you cut out a man's tongue, you don't prove that he's wrong, you just prove you're scared of what he has to say, you
Mhm.
know. And so it's like we need to create spaces where people can have these conversations, and yeah, they might get taken apart by the public discourse, but I don't believe censorship is the way out of it. It's the whole, how did you get to that place where you hold that view you have? And so I wanted to create
Mhm.
a space. And so it's a panel discussion between myself and a couple of co-hosts. Some are intermittent, but where we want to have these conversations, right? And we'll bring on special guests as well. I think like my next week's guest. So we go live with It's Not So Black and White on Monday nights at 7:30 Mountain Time. So it'll be 9:30 Eastern, 6:30 Pacific. And next
Okay.
week we have a guy who ran Barack Obama's Twitter handle actually coming on.
Really?
Yeah, for this next week, this Monday night. So that should be an interesting one. It's
Wow.
myself. One of
Be
my
sure to check that out, Junkers, this Monday
yeah,
night.
yeah, yeah. My co-host Lamar, he grew up in like Harlem and the Bronx, and so it's like I'm a white dude from small town Canada. My buddy Lamar grew up in like inner city New York, and so us just bridging this gap, and like it started with us just having these conversations, and we were like, we should document these conversations, because I've learned so much from him, and he's learned a few. I'd like to say I think he's learned a few things from me. But it just, this huge cultural gap. But we, like when the BLM protests were happening and things like that, like, I said, what is your take on this? And I was like, why do you think this is okay, or this is like, so for me to like, and he was really gracious in terms of, I had a lot of difficult questions where I was like, can I ask, and like, I don't want to sound ignorant, but I'm going to ask you these hard questions because I want to learn about this situation. And it didn't be, and he was really gracious, and he was very well spoken. He's got a voice like Barry White, and it's funny that
Okay.
my nickname for him is Jacked Black. So
That's funny. We actually
yeah.
had one of our co-hosts on the break room. He kind of looks like Jack Black, but he's darker, so he has the name
Uh,
Jack Blacker.
oh,
Um,
that's funny. Well, I just call him Jacked Black because he's 48 and he's an impressive physical specimen. And I'm like, you're jacked, like, and
Jack Black. Okay, I like that.
yeah. So he's an impressive physical specimen. He's got this like deep voice that's just made for radio, and I would love to hear him sing like this
Mm,
deep resonant baritone. I'm like, oh my gosh, he's brilliant with analogies, and he's such a deep thinker, and it's so interesting. For example, like not so long, he lives in North Carolina right now, but not so long ago, he was just filling up with gas at the gas station, went in to pay. And when he came back out, a lady said, hey, just to let you know, that guy in that pickup truck over there spit on your door handle. And he's like, oh. And, it's some white redneck dude in a pickup truck who had his phone out ready to film him, trying to create a situation.
mm,
And I was like, man. And Lamar is way smarter than that, right? Like, he's
mm,
ex-military. He's paramedic in New York City.
mm.
He's got stories. This guy has been through
He's
hell
been
and
through
back.
worse than that.
He was at 9/11. His partner died,
Oh wow.
like as a paramedic in New York City. He was bombed in Iraq when he was in the Air Force. Like, some guy spitting on his door handle is not going to rattle him. Like,
No.
you know,
And if it
uh,
does, that's not a good day for you.
yeah. Well, that's the thing. And it's funny because I think as he came out and this guy saw me, he actually took a step back. He's like, oh my God, like, this guy's a lot bigger in real life, but like, Lamar's not going around looking for a fight, but he said it was so interesting from his experience because he was now, he was like looking around like, is this guy following me? Did he record my license plate? Does he want to see where I live? Is he going to harass my wife? He's all these thoughts coming through his head now that wouldn't have been there. And it's like, I've never had an experience like that. Well, okay, maybe I have actually. Okay, but I mean, how about in Canada? I've never had an experience like that. I've lived in 7 other foreign countries where I've had some really, as you know, now had some interesting experiences.
Yes,
But
few little interesting experiences.
yeah. So we've bonded over a lot of these things, and so we wanted to create a space for these kinds of conversations where we can go into the hard topics, we can ask the hard questions, and not get pissed off at each other, but really respectfully, like, and even sometimes just agree to disagree on something and go, hey, we can agree to disagree and still be civil with each other. So, I consider him like an uncle to my kid. He's like a brother to me. I love him. Like, doesn't matter if we disagree on something, because the connection that we've forged is so much more important. And then I've got a couple of other cool co-hosts and whatnot. Like, it's, I'm really interested to see where that one goes. Clearly, by how much attention or air I'm giving it, you can see like I'm passionate about this.
Yes, and you really should be as well, because the value of discourse that can lead to a disagreement is completely undervalued, because people don't understand that that's how you get an exchange of ideas. That's how you begin to learn the opposite side. That's how you begin to deconstruct your own bias and actually form an opinion. And people don't do that. They don't have the ability to do that. They all react and think with their heart and their emotions. They don't actually know what they're saying or why they're really saying it. Most of them are parrot talking because they want to be able to have something to talk about, but everybody's surface dwelling, so they don't need to know more. So as soon as you begin to dive a little bit more, people get offended because now you're starting to show that they don't know what they're talking about, and they took a very hard stance on a topic that's complicated. It's popular to have an opinion on something very difficult, and it doesn't matter if you're educated, because nobody's going to check because they're not educated. Which is why the whole, not to sidestep, but the whole cover of how Ukraine and what's going on, the amount of live streams and videos and just memes and jokes that I see is it just such a hard evidence of the disconnect that people have from reality, and not understanding this is not something that you should be joking about. And it's bizarre that it's something that is being live streamed and recorded on phones during a battle. Like, that's crazy to me. I know we have footage of World War II, but it wasn't the man with the weapons that are standing there doing it, It's
and what I can say, having lived in Eastern Europe and traveled around Eastern Europe, is the situation is a lot more nuanced than just Putin bad, Ukraine good.
Yes.
It is there is a messy quagmire in there.
It goes back to Crimea, and people don't even know what that means.
Oh, look, Crimea was owned by Russia. They gifted it to the Ukrainians in 1954. Who even knows that was the case? And they took it back because they were like, if Ukraine comes NATO, we lose this really valuable seaport. It's one of our, and so on. Like, that would be, we'll have to have another.
There's a whole other talk right there.
yeah. But the idea is, it's not to say that I am, for example, that I'm pro-Russian just because I don't think Putin is 100% at fault here. That's where we get trapped in this binary thinking, and we lose the ability to think with nuance. Because at the end of the day, who is suffering here? It's the average Ukrainian person who's essentially caught in this battle, this power struggle between different elites, and like, no, I didn't mention this earlier, but living in Poland and seeing Ukraine, some of the most racist people I have ever met in my life, and it shocked me, like the things that I heard them say. And then, people think that this whole neo-Nazi thing in Ukraine is a cover story. I'm like, you don't realize how deep this runs. Like, they have an entire army battalion of neo-Nazis, sworn neo-Nazis. They have neo-Nazis in every structure of government right up until they reach Zelensky, who's not one, but he's a puppet. And they use his Jewishness to cover for the fact that like half of his government is these extremist white nationalists who believe they're fighting. I mean, this guy, one of the leaders of this movement, is on camera like a day or two ago being recorded saying, these idiots from the West think they're supporting us in this fight against Russia. They don't realize we're actually white nationalists fighting for the white race. And so, and it was just this crazy stuff that I was like, he's publicly like, this is the thing, they're publicly saying this stuff. It blows my mind, but it doesn't get coverage because it's inconvenient, because it goes against the narrative of just like, Putin bad because Russia's our historical enemy. It's like, I don't agree with war. I don't agree with invading another country. However, I come from this place of let's try to understand why this happened. Why did he choose this course of action? And I bet you it's a lot more nuanced than than the average person realizes, who just collects like media sound bites. And it's like, if we want to create change, we have to be able to put ourselves in this place where we go, I don't agree with the move that you took, but I understand from your perspective why you took that move. And in that place, we can actually start to maybe be an agent for change instead of just like butting heads with each other.
Very well said. Well, Sir John the Legendary, thank you for being on with us today and giving us a legendary interview. I know this was longer than our junkers are usually used to, but you know what? I'm not Jason. We don't do it like Jason. We do it like
yeah.
We come together, we do our own things, and that's how we meet wonderful people like yourself, John. Before we head out here, do you want to let us know where we can find you, your social medias, your website, anything like that?
Yeah, freedomnutritioncoach.com. And really on all the social platforms, if you just look up Freedom Nutrition Coaching, you'll find me. And of course, you heard about my podcast, Between the Before and After, Wellness Unfiltered, and It's Not So Black and White. So depending on what your flavor is, there's a few different options there. And you know what? You can send me a friend request on, like on Facebook, for example. I don't go by Sir John the Legendary. I actually just go by my real name. But, hey, and if someone out there is listening and you got a podcast and like, hey, this was interesting, I'd like to chat with this guy. I mean, clearly I like talking. So, I'm also open to connecting with people as well, because there's such value in having conversations like this. Like, you and I are going to walk away from this conversation having gotten value. You expressed some really cool sentiments. And I'm like, I feel almost bad that I've like been so enthusiastically talking that like we didn't pick.
Not at all. That's what I wanted. I wanted you to be able to express and tell, because I knew there was a lot for you to tell, and you definitely shared at least a portion with us.
Yeah.
And I'm very thankful for that.
Yeah. And thank you for hosting this space. I mean, it's amazing that you guys do this and create this platform as well. I think it's awesome. So it's been a real pleasure.
Thank you, John. Well, thank you, Junkers. Be sure to check out all 3 of his podcasts, and be sure to check us out, Talking Junk in the Break Room. Unfortunately, we'll be taking a day off tomorrow. Sorry about that. You're going to have to go a week without us, but we'll be coming up the following week. I think we're going to be talking about Jackass Forever. If you haven't seen that, check it out. Definitely a throwback, especially from our age. Absolutely hilarious. But until next time, Junkers, you have a wonderful night. We'll talk to you later.
Welcome to Talking Junk.
I'm your host, Jason Melendez.
Live now every week on Fridays.
Talking Junk.
A multitude of professionals in different aspects, different walks of life.
You have to come on and talk junk like a normal person.